Alright, so in this video, I'm going to try to talk through basically the stuff that happens at the end of Gatsby and kind of get into some of the symbolism and stuff like that. So, to start off, we've got a character map here. This kind of shows everyone. I'll kind of move my mouse over top of it. We have, of course, Jay Gatsby, the Great Gatsby. Of course, his friend Nick Carraway. He's only connected to Jordan on this one, but obviously we could put multiple other arrows for Nick Carraway for, being Daisy's cousin and putting a line to Gatsby as a friend. We've got, of course, the Wilsons over here. We've got Tom and Daisy Buchanan. And, of course, this is all stuff you should know by now because by the time you watch this video, you should probably have read the last chapters of the book. We're also, of course, set in the 1920s. So I'm going to hit some of the big points here. 1920s, of course, we're talking about a time period, also sometimes called the Roaring Twenties, this idea of sort of a culture of excess, that it's a culture where again, we've got things like, as it says, flappers, Art Deco, and we've got, these extravagant parties that you see in The Great Gatsby. We've got obvious corruption dealing with prohibition, where, of course, alcohol is still pretty much everywhere, even though it's illegal. So we have this very weird culture here. And, of course, we've got the memes here, the jokes about this, we're 2 years away from the Roaring Twenties. You think I'm not going to party like Gatsby, then you're absolutely wrong, old sport. But then, of course, we have this one that I think I posted on Classroom during the first week of all of this. The whole idea that there's a lot of bad things that were happening in the 20s, too. Of course, none of this stuff, especially with the stock market, the infectious disease actually happened in the beginning. It started with Spanish flu in the late teens and then went into the 20s. And then the U.S. stock market tanking, of course, is with mostly Black Friday that starts in 29. But yeah, we had certainly bookended the 20s pretty horribly. So hopefully that doesn't mean that 2029 will have, a huge depression event, but, hopefully not. We also have, of course, the ending of this. We have lots of people die. And this is one of the good jokes out there, of course, from the song, but ain't no party like a Gatsby party because a Gatsby party don't stop until at least 2 people are dead and everyone is disillusioned with the jazz age as a whole. Of course, we actually have 3 people that die in our story, and we'll get to that shortly. But this does fit that tragic mold. We have a character that's fighting against the system. Gatsby's trying to rise up and make himself something in this world that celebrates old money, and where old money doesn't really celebrate new money, that they see them as lesser. He's trying to break into that top tier and make himself on Tom Buchanan's level so that he is worthy of Daisy. And of course, he gets struck down for that in the end. Where's my mouse? There's my mouse. So then let's get into some of the characters. I want to start with, of course, this is our narrator. We've got Nick. And of course, Nick, as we've got in kind of the joke over here, I'm just a nice guy. I don't judge anybody, really. That's why I can date you, Jordan, even though you could probably guess what's behind that. And I could be friends with Tom, even though he's racist, and Daisy, even though she's the worst, too. And this is Nick's problem, but this is partially what makes the story interesting, is the narrator is someone who is helping and setting the chain of events along, but he's someone who's kind of a blank slate character in some ways, at least when it comes to judging other people. And of course, you've got this. I think that's from Spider-Man 3, if I remember correctly. Whole idea of, he knows all the truth behind almost everything, more so than certainly any other character in this book, but, he sees all this stuff happening. And then, of course, we've got Gatsby. And Gatsby is this person that, the biggest thing with Gatsby is that he just embodies that love of the American dream. And that's kind of the symbolic meaning of this book, is typically it's talked about as being about the American dream. And he just wants to rise up. And he meets this girl, falls in love with her, and he decides that's his destiny. And he chases after her with everything he's got. And at least, the way we've got it here, it seems very, very romantic. Hasn't seen you in years, spent the time becoming a good provider, and gives you dozens of flowers because he loved you all along. But there's something kind of, creepy and weird about this, too, because he doesn't come back to her after the war. He hides because he doesn't feel he's good enough for her. And because of that, he does allow her to escape. But then once she is married, once she has moved on, he keeps obsessing. He sticks with this singular mission for 5 years. And as we've got down here, ultimately, other than the fact that she's pretty and she's rich, Daisy's not a great person, as we see in the end. All right, so the next thing I want to get to is this idea of each person's sin. And this is a good way to kind of look at this. So we've got Gatsby. He's very naive. He thinks he can relive the past. Can't relive the past? Of course you can. And he also wants to rise above his station. He wants to grab onto this American dream, and he wants to make his life a great life. And in a sense, there's nothing wrong with that, but of course, that's his sin in the sense that it's the thing that the book punishes him for. So, wanting to rise up, not a sin. Um, Having a sense of nostalgia, not a sin. But in this book, of course, those are the things he's punished for. Tom, of course, is the worst. He is the worst. Well, maybe Daisy's the worst by the end. But Tom is racist. He's a narcissist. He's sexist. He's awful in pretty much every single way. But the reason that I think he is that way is because of this idea. He wants to exert his power over others and feel superior. In the other video, I'm actually making these out of order, but in the video for chapters 5 and 6, the discussion questions that I wanted to talk over with you guys, in that one of the questions was about the polo player thing. And that's a big spot that kind of gets this, that he wants to feel important. He wants to feel like he's accomplished something, but Tom hasn't. Tom inherited all his money. Gatsby might actually be onto something when he calls him the polo player. That might be the most significant thing that he's actually done himself, because everything else is just inheriting money because he's a Buchanan. And apparently, at least in this world, the Buchanans are this very, very famous and wealthy family. So he wants to exert that power, feel like he is, in fact, superior. That's why he reads these books, these racist books that tells him why he's better than black people, or, people of sort of like Indian descent. And by that I mean India, but, also probably Native American descent or of Asian descent. He needs to find reasons to put himself above other people. And that's why he does what he does to George Wilson. That's a power play every time. He does it to the guy that he's buying the dog from Myrtle. There's a reason that he cares about having Myrtle around at all. When he's with Daisy, Daisy doesn't adore him the way that he wants to be adored because they are equals. And he wants someone that makes him feel like he is the best thing ever. So that's kind of his big sin. Daisy, shallow, status obsessed, narcissist. There is a side to Daisy that is okay. Obviously, she's a character that probably after chapter 5, many of you guys in your 5-6 questions were actually excusing what Nick was doing because it seemed like you wanted Daisy to have a shot at happiness. You probably don't feel that way by the end of the book. And that's because, again, she's willing to just go the easiest route because that's ultimately what she did by choosing Tom. She claims to have loved Gatsby, but it would have been a harder path. She would have had to go against her family. She would have had to basically take the Aunt Georgiana path from Wagner Matinee. It was a tougher path. And, of course, in that book, Georgiana seems like she regrets it by the end, but her choice. But she chose love. Daisy chooses money. Daisy chooses the path of least resistance, the path that won't alienate her from her family. Next, we have Nick, who, of course, lack of judgment. I like to word it that way because it's fair in two ways that way. He doesn't judge others, but he doesn't show any judgment with the people that he hangs out with either. It's good not to judge people, for instance, for their past. That everyone has a past, yada, yada, yada. I was actually reading a book. Let me grab these right over here. This is actually a Matthew Kelly book who writes a lot of religious stuff. And let me get the exact quote here because it was a good quote. This is an Oscar Wilde quote. It says, "Every saint has a past and every sinner has a future." And, if someone has moved past their past mistakes, then it's good not to judge them. But maybe it's good to judge people during the time that they're making those mistakes. Maybe it's good to not just enable people to keep doing these things. Nick's friends with Tom, who's, again, horribly racist. He's willing to date Jordan even though he knows Jordan cheats at things and is basically this person who lacks any morals, as we're about to get to on the next one. So all of this is pretty bad. My display capture seems to be a little off. I'm going to fix that. There we go. I had that bar at the top. I didn't realize it until just now. He's willing to help Gatsby and Daisy, have this affair, which, maybe Daisy does deserve more happiness than what Tom's giving her, but, there are probably better ways to do it than sneaking around and having an affair. Actually get divorced from Tom. do it the right way. Maybe that's better than actually condoning, adultery. And then, of course, from Jordan, lack of any guiding principles, morals at all. She just does whatever is most beneficial for her at the time. She's entirely egocentric. Myrtle wants to rise above her station. Everything about her is that she looks up to people. She's considered to be pretty by people who would know. That's downgrading or degrading her own thoughts and like making people like Tom, people like Daisy. She looks up to those people so much that that's what she looks for, even for her sense of what's good and bad, in the sense of her sister's beauty. And lastly, George, his only real sin is that he's unintelligent and ignorant, that he doesn't see the bigger things happening in his life. So with these characters, for their sins, what happens to them? Well, Gatsby starts poor, becomes rich, and gets murdered. Daisy, Tom, Nick, and Jordan basically have no consequences. Nick has sort of a consequence, but it's all in his head. It's just that he becomes disillusioned and gets angry with everyone. Obviously, you see that he's not on good terms with Tom by the end. He's not on good terms with Jordan by the end. Everyone else on here is dead, or obviously Daisy. And then Myrtle and George are, of course, also killed. So who lives? The people that were part of money the whole time. Who dies? The people that were poor the whole time. Gatsby, well, not the whole time, that were born poor. Gatsby, Myrtle, and George. And the two that are the richest, Tom and Daisy, literally are part of a murder, and we have to presume that Tom knows, part of a cover-up. And although maybe Tom doesn't know, I think there's evidence going both ways. And I've always assumed that he does, but I think maybe, if I remember correctly, there might be a line in the later chapters where maybe it kind of implies that Nick realizes that he doesn't. I don't recall. I might be wrong on that. I need to reread that chapter. But anyway, again, these two face no consequences. Daisy literally murders a person and faces no consequences because they just dump their problems on everyone else. And this is where we get to that Valley of the Ashes being all the more symbolic. That idea of, the Valley of the Ashes is where all these rich people, they live, they do all this stuff with their life, and then they dump the ashes in the poor area. We don't want to see that in West Egg or even in East, especially in East Egg. But it can certainly, be a wasteland near where the Wilson garage is. So I'm going to cut this off at this point, and we'll jump into video 2. But I wanted to make sure these weren't too long. So that kind of sets things up. Now next we'll get into the symbolism.